Thank you very much, Violeta. Very honoured to have had such a warm introduction, and hello to everybody listening. I'm very much looking forward to a useful hour together talking through the principles that underpin aviation English, and also going way beyond the published material to exploring and analysing some of the areas of aviation English language teaching and assessment that affect the work that we do as aviation English teachers. Violeta asked me to talk a little bit about how we came to write aviation English and what factors influenced our thinking as we worked on the syllabus and shaped it into something which eventually became the book. So I'll begin by running through some of those issues with you and tell you a little bit about where I came from and how Andy and I arrived at that situation. We'd been teaching aviation English for some years, nothing really to do with the aviation language proficiency requirements, as they didn't really come about until 2003 when ICAO adopted those requirements as part of their standard and recommended practices. We had been teaching air traffic controllers, mostly from France, who were sent over for a week of language refreshment in the UK every year, and it occurred to me one day that having a class of 8 or 9 air traffic controllers and 1 or 2 general language students, that perhaps I ought to start thinking about addressing the needs of the people that were in front of me. So we started working with more aviation English specific material then, and then of course with the advent of the language proficiency requirements in 2003 and the subsequent publication of document 9835 in 2004, we realized that we had to formalize what we were doing in the classroom and tighten it up. And in fact, I remember quite clearly the day that document 9835 arrived on my desk, and the director of the school at the time said to me, Andy, write a course. And that's really where we got involved with materials development. We worked with our own homespun materials, as most aviation English teachers do, for a good couple of years anyway, and as I'm sure most aviation English teachers found before published materials, like off-the-shelf materials, appeared on the market, it was a very difficult job to do. I found that I was teaching a 2 or 3 hour class each day, and before that class I was running around like a headless chicken trying to bring various elements of the class together. At the end of the class, instantly it would be collapse in a heap with a cup of tea and try and recover, and then it would be spending a lot of the afternoon, evening time, a lot of my own time really, developing material for the following day, and it was working very much on the hoof, very much off the cuff, and it struck both Andy and I that we didn't really have a solid syllabus to be working from. We were working very loosely from document 9835, but the lessons that we were delivering, the order, the sequence in which they arrived, the presence or absence of radio communications in those classes, it was very ad hoc. At that time, both Andy and I thought, well, if we're working so hard to produce materials, maybe the way forward would be to approach publishers and see if they would be willing to publish some work. So Andy, some years ago now, got in touch with all of the major UK ELT publishers, and we had no response for about 18 months until Macmillan called back and said, we're interested in this. And we had a meeting and we threw together some sample materials and a syllabus, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so a little bit about how we came to putting the syllabus together and writing the material. In terms of the selecting a core language around which we could develop pronunciation, develop speaking and listening activities, around where we could look at vocabulary, we needed something core to hold on to, and we were always very happy with a functional approach to syllabus design. And so we took the functions from one of the appendices in document 9835 and selected those that we felt were most pertinent to radio communications. Anybody who's familiar with that particular document will know that there are functions in there which are not necessarily easy to teach. There are functions in there that are not necessarily high frequency functions or particularly useful for everyday or critical communications. And despite the solid research that went into producing the document, it's actually quite a difficult document to use. So we selected what we felt were the richest, most teachable, most learnable, most usable functions from that list. And those are the functions which guide the 12 units of the book. Around that, we needed to frame topics, and we decided that the radiotelephony ought to be the driver of each unit. So section 3 contains a radiotelephony dialogue. All of those were based to a certain extent on authentic communications, and we selected the topics from a list of topics that are used for air traffic control training at Eurocontrol, which we whittled down from a list of 16 to 12 most common non-routine situations in flight operations. So then we had our functions and we had topics. We needed also to work with vocabulary. One of the most difficult areas about this whole discipline is the lack of corpus data, in that we don't know what vocabulary is used in these non-routine situations, or at least we have no empirical evidence for it. And so we are dealing very much with the unknown, and that's what Andy and I did. We chose high frequency lexical items which we found to appear in authentic radiotelephony dialogues, and built on these lexical sets which to some degree or other hung around the topics. So looking at Unit 5, for example, we've got functions to do with aircraft manoeuvres, and we've got units of measurement. Some of the way lexical sets and the topics fall together are completely arbitrary. Some of them fitted together very naturally. For example, symptoms and dealing with medical emergencies on board flights and first aid type equipment and conditions were an obvious choice for a unit based around the topic of health. So that was our vocabulary and our functions, and then we looked also at pronunciation. And the pronunciation syllabus we divided into macro and micro level skills, macro being the suprasegmental stuff, connecting speech, not necessarily connected speech, but connecting speech together and using prosody and other aspects of pronunciation to make ourselves intelligible over longer units of speech. Then at a more micro level, looking at issues of word stress and the articulation and discrimination between individual sounds. The syllabus there is based primarily on the work of Jennifer Jenkins in her book in 2000, I think it was 2000, she published it, English, the phonology of English as an international language, what Jennifer considered to be the core areas of phonology that were important for international intelligibility, and then broke those down into macro and micro areas of pronunciation and threaded those areas through the 12 units of the book. And in a nutshell, that's it. I'll stop there. That's how we arrived at producing this book. Needless to say, there were about 18 months of arguments, pain, tears, fights, making friends, breaking friends, going down the pub for a drink together, falling out again the next day, and which strengthened and made much more robust the working relationship I have with Andy. But we do have quite a tempestuous relationship, but hopefully that has produced something which is usable and useful for aviation English teachers and the students that they work with around the world.